When you think about great singing, what comes to mind? Is it power? Is it volume? Is it darkness? Is it a big booming sound? Well, according to the greatest singers that we've been talking about in this book, which you should buy, it's called We Sing Better by James Anderson, you might be focusing on the wrong thing entirely. Today, we're diving into the historical vocal training, real comments, real singers from this book here. In the old Italian schools, one principle guided everything. Seek quality and quantity will come. According to Anderson's commentary, singers were trained to keep their natural sound and to find the center of their tone and to trust that over time, that core would grow into something incredibly big and vibrant. So they weren't forcing, they weren't pushing, they weren't darkening, and it was all just through purity and consistency. And were these singers any quieter? Absolutely not. Carrie Tubb, who sang with the greats of the early 20th century, said that of the older generation, there were larger voices, bigger voices. They took more time over their training. So the biggest voices weren't the ones forcing sound, they were the ones exercising patience. Now let's take in the case of Emma Ames, the American soprano who became an international success almost overnight. Her earlier teacher, Clara Munger, trained in the classical Italian lineage and was incredibly careful with Ames. Ames said that my teacher brought my voice out gradually without allowing me to force it in any way. The exercises she gave me never demanded that which was beyond my actual powers. Ames eventually developed an enormous, powerful voice, but it happened naturally. The lesson: if you push for volume before purity, you stunt the very thing that you're trying to grow. So this is often a thing that I hear in the classical world specifically, is that you don't want to push your voice, you want it to be natural. But the problem is that we have the wonderful invention called recordings. And so we hear somebody and we're like, I want to sound like that. And it's usually a singer who has peaked vocally, right? So that means that they're at their prime age, which could be anywhere between 30 and 50 years old. So what we'll do is then we try to manipulate our sound to sound older. And I am guilty of one of those people. I was a little musical theater soprano with a beautiful, shimmery little fairy voice. And I went into my undergrad and was surrounded by huge voices. And I'm a very good mimicker. So good that it's actually kind of an issue for me. I can replicate any voice, any accent, any sound pretty quickly. And so when I was hearing these giant, enormous voices in real time, I was like, well, they're getting all the leads. I want to be able to sound that good and be that good too. So I'm going to make my 18-year-old voice sound like a 35-year-old woman. What? And nobody stopped me. That was the worst part, is that like I had teachers who were always preaching this kind of stuff of like, you have to be, natural and don't push your voice past what it can do. But they never clocked that I was doing it, and I don't know why. So that's a little tangent, but going on. Again, quality before quantity, again and again and again and again. Isabel Bally, one of Britain's legendary oratorio sopranos. Oratorio is not aria. Oratorio is like aria, but it's in more of like a masterwork setting or a mass setting. So her teacher, Soma, last name Soma, I'm not going to even try to pronounce his first name because I'll probably butcher it, made no attempt to enlarge her voice and instead aimed for an evenness of tone throughout its entire range. And did that limit her? Not at all. She filled massive halls without any amplification. Consistency, purity, and balance created carrying power without any pushing. So again, this kind of goes back to the attack video that I made where we don't need to push. We can open our mouth and let the sound out. So the next section is the foundation, which is, again, purity of tone. What did the 19th century's teachers focus on first? And that was purity. Michael Balfe wrote in 1850, "The first object is to bring out the natural tone in its purest possible state." Richard Bacon doubled down, insisting the student must produce the unadulterated natural voice, forming the tone pure. And the voice will naturally acquire volume from exercise. So if you think you need to sound full or dark or big or husky, like you smoke 8 packs a day, even though you've never touched a cigarette in your life, stop. That's not your voice. You need to accept yourself. Now we're getting into the woo-woo of it all. You need to accept yourself as it is. There's no vocal Botox that you can do to make it sound the way that you want it to sound, or to make yourself sound like a singer that you will never be. And you know what? Those singers will never be you. I've said before to many of my students, Adele and Beyonce are two very talented singers. Adele will never sound like Beyonce, and Beyonce will never sound like Adele. And if they try to sound like each other, they're gonna hurt themselves. Just keep that in mind. You can still be great, you can still have a beautiful voice, but it's yours and no one else's. That's kind of nice and kind of cool. Okay, after purity comes clarity. They kind of overlap. You could consider purity the same thing as clarity. Maria Jaritza, celebrated in Vienna and New York as an opera singer, talked about her early lessons. So she said that my teacher taught me one very important thing, not to scream and not to force my voice. The habit of screaming and forcing tone, if developed while the voice is forming, has ruinous consequences. Her adult voice was huge, clear, brilliant, anything but small, and that was where it was at its peak. And she said, going back, she said, if developed while the voice is forming, it has ruinous consequences. I have experienced that. I'm still trying to beat it out of me. Don't push your voice past what it can be in any given moment. Even if you're having a bad voice day, don't push it. Continuing along the lines of not pushing, Amelita Gali Curci or Churchi, I'm not sure. One of the most beloved sopranos of all time put it plainly. Never force the voice, never push the breath. If you blow too much air into the flute, you get a whistling tone. Or if you remember, I'm sure most of my American students have picked up a recorder in their lifetime, particularly their childhood. Do you remember blowing as much air as possible into that instrument? Didn't sound good. So this is what she's saying. It's the same thing. It's not going to sound good with the voice if you push a bunch of air. If you force a violin tone, it scratches. And it's all the same thing with the voice. So again, just don't push. Keep it clear, keep it easy. Almost so easy it feels like you're doing nothing. So the next requirement is steadiness. Clara Novello was still singing with a clear, steady, bell-like tone at even 70. And even at 90, she astonished listeners with her calm, unwavering line. Sims Reeves jokingly called himself the old robust tenor without tremolo. A tremolo is the old wobble. That's a tremolo. And Isabelle Ballier complained in the 1960s that the vibrato one constantly hears is vaguely pitched, wide, wobbling noise. So she's talking about the beginning of this a late opera style that we see a lot of these huge crazy vibratos. I sometimes say it sounds like if you were wiping a mirror back and forth at 3 times speed. That's what it sounds like to me. Once purity and clarity and steadiness were established, the voice was expected to develop concentration, which is the living center of the tone. Emma Ames admired Marietta Alboni for, quote, her wonderful concentration of the tone. So the concentration is in reference, what they're referencing concentration as is they're referencing it as like the core of the sound. The core is what makes voices vibrate. It's not anything that you do to make it shine, it's just the center of the pitch and the center of the tone. It's the difference between a hollow sound and a vibrant one, right? There's a difference between if I'm in my head voice, that's hollow, and that has a little bit more core to it. Bridget Nilsson described, who was also kind of the last of this group of singers. So she was, I think, in the 1960s, but she was kind of the last person to really apply any of this technique, famously, rather. So she said that she was always aiming for an equal intensity in each note, like a violin, right? So when you're playing violin properly, when you go one note to the next, there's not going to be a difference in timbre. It's going to be the same, and it should be the same. And we have to approach the singing and the voices in the same way. Tenor Alfredo Kraus was famous for his effortless projection. He explained that a bright sound with metal in it carries. A dark sound is big, but it stays where it is, and it is dangerous to the voice. So interesting. A bright sound with metal in it carries. A dark sound is big, but it stays where it is. I would have to agree with that. And Sir Henry Wood, who was a conductor, said that it is only a bright, clean tone which can really carry over an orchestra. Ring in the tone is great quality for which to work. He warned singers against dull, hooty, foggy, flummy, breathy tone, and summed up the foundation as bright, ringing, and clear as a silver trumpet. Right? So there's a difference between a foghorn and a trumpet. They're both horns. One can carry a little bit sharper, a little bit clearer than the other. Contraltos, the darkest voices in classical singing, were also trained in brightness. Now, here's the thing. We're going to get into this a little bit. Mezzos rarely exist. True, honest mezzos rarely exist. A lot of mezzos we see today are sopranos who can't sing high notes. Why? because they're over darkening their voice. What we're about to read now is how even natural contraltos, lower singers, must have this brightness and this clarity in their voice. Here's the quote. Schumann-Heink recommended smiling exercises, which we've talked about before, and said, don't be afraid of trivial, colorless tone. You can make it somber later. Again, just starting bright and pure, and you can kind of stylize it later. And making sure that even though you sing low, it doesn't mean that you need to sing like an old person. You can still sing almost childlike. It's okay to sound a little childlike. It heals your inner child anyway. So Victorian teachers known as SVS said that the same. Begin with a thin but firm tone, not heavy, not dark, not artificially full. Richard Strauss, working with the largest orchestras of his day, noticed this about specific singers. If you don't know who Richard Strauss is, you should look him up. But I promise you, you've heard some of his music before. Singers with big voices but poor enunciation were swallowed by the orchestra, while smaller voices with sharp enunciation and distinct phrasing carried easily. Isn't that interesting? So the secret to projection isn't size, it's purity, it's clarity, it's ring, and it's diction. So what sound should you aim for, even if you are not an opera singer? If we combine all of these accounts together from sopranos, contraltos, from tenors and basses, from composers, conductors, from teachers, there's so many different people that are speaking in this chapter. We get a remarkably consistent message, which is that you need to aim for this sound. It needs to be pure, clear, steady, bright, ringing, unforced, natural, focused, with a living core or kernel that will grow over time, not darkened, pushed, artificially full and wobbling, and certainly not loud before it's beautiful. Certainly not loud before it's beautiful. The old masters believed, get the quality right and the quantity will come, and with patience, it always did. That's it for today's video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down below. Again, this was more of a discussion than an exercise, so if you would like more exercises that kind of are guided towards this discussion, I can make some for you. But until then, I will see you next time.